This is going to be a full tour of all my LEGO space stuff, so let's get right into it. As of right now, I have 3 main spacecraft. I have the Apollo LEGO Lunar Lander, I have the Mercury Redstone rocket, and I have the enormous Saturn V moon rocket. Now, to be fair, the Saturn V is not completely done yet. I am still waiting for some parts for that launch tower, which is going to be absolutely enormous. But I can sort of talk about how all these things were related and how they all played a big role in the space race. This will not be all the space stuff I build. I do plan on doing a space shuttle and a Soyuz rocket to be the sort of competitor to the Saturn V rocket. It was really in the same space, but that's that. But I'm going to go from the beginning of the era over here to what the space race ended with. At the very beginning over here, we have the Mercury Redstone rocket. This thing was basically just a human-rated missile. You can even see that it's about the same size as a missile, and I used a lot of these 1x2 curved slopes all the way up the body of the rocket, to get that shape there. You can see at the very top, that is the capsule. This red thing, that is the launch escape tower system, and that was used if this rocket decided to explode. This could lift the capsule off the top of it and bring it to safety. You may notice that this missile is barely taller than that rough area on the Saturn V. That is something that is very interesting when to compare, and I get a lot of questions whether is this thing actually minifigure scale. And the answer to that is yes, this is minifigure scale. It is just really, really tiny. In fact, I do believe you had to be under 5'4" to be able to fit into that Mercury capsule at the very top. Now, despite this thing looking fairly simple, it uses some interesting building techniques up here at the way top. In order to get this sort of striped pattern, I had to use some bricks on side construction, and that got kind of interesting all the way along down here. But most of these parts can be found at the local LEGO store, ranging from these 1x2 white curved slopes all the way down to the 1x2 black curved slopes. Most of these can be found, and I'm guessing this is under $20 right here, this entire sort of setup. Something else I like about this is it's very sturdy. You can sort of roll it around and play with it all you want. It's very, very swooshable, even though you have this thing at the very top up here. And I really like this one. This is definitely something that is not overly viewed that often on YouTube, but I definitely think it has a huge role in the space race, mostly because of its importance in sending people into space for the very first time. Yes, it is not an orbital rocket, but it is a rocket nonetheless that did play a role at the beginning of the space race, and that's why it deserves a spot in my collection. The next thing we've got going over here is this sort of setup here. This is a diorama that I set up. It is elevated by 1 brick. This was my sort of setup to show the Apollo 11 lunar landing. Now what we've got going here is quite a few little things, so I'm going to explain it to you here. First of all, we have this spaceship, which is the lunar module. This was the thing that actually landed on the moon from Apollo. You can see the huge difference between the sizes of just that lunar module and the top of this. You can see where they went in a good 5 or 6 years. They went from this little capsule up here at the top to this very large lunar lander, for at the time being very large. And this thing really comprises of 2 stages. We have the descent stage, which has that gold and black on the bottom here with those landing pedals. And then we have the ascent stage, which is this your gray part up here. And this is the bit that actually landed on the moon. And I sort of have a setup here where those sort of studs are actually recessed into the base plate. This is not a base plate, this is a bunch of little plates. So yes, this has guzzled a huge amount of parts, but I think it really looks good and helps sort of understand the sort of situation that they were on the moon. And over there you have that crater that Apollo 11 landed very close to. That is something that I did want to include, so that is why it is there. And we even have all the little flags set up here, and we only have 1 astronaut right now, though I hope to be getting another one pretty soon. So that's really interesting. This little outcropping over here does include I believe this is the seismic experiment. This would actually measure the seismic stuff going on the moon, and this can fold up to fit inside the lunar module. And speaking of the lunar module, this thing does have a compartment bay in here, and this one has been modified into the Apollo 15, 16, and 17 lunar module. That came out too much there, but you can see that after we pull our door off, you get to see the little lunar rover in there, and that is quite interesting because that took a lot of effort to get to fold up in there, and our door came popping off here, but you can see that this is supposed to stick right on just like that. And after you do that, you can open the door and there is a little lunar rover. I'm not going to take it out and assemble it right now since that would take a lot of time. But you can see that this can carry some cargo. Right now it has the lunar rover in it. It could also carry this little seismic experiment if it wanted. And there's also some room for this other sort of stuff that's littered along the lunar surface. So that is definitely something that should be noted. The functionality of the spacecraft is fairly simple. It has 1 or 2 studs connecting it on the very bottom. You just have to sort of loosen those and then it comes right off. You can see there is the ascent engine on the ascent stage. And the descent stage has a little cutout right there. You can see the lunar rover in there through it. And this is the descent stage. It is, like I said, fairly simple. We're going to shut our door here if it'll let us. The parts in there have a lot of friction, but yeah, their door is shut. This thing is fairly simple. It has a bunch of those metallic gold parts, which are very hard to come across. And I'm really happy with this. I'm happy with it turned out. I'm probably going to build another one to go on the top of the Saturn V, which is sitting behind us right there. But right now, this is just going to be separate on display for the public to see when I take this to shows. And it's fairly simple. I mean, this build is relatively complicated. There are some interesting features in here, but I thought this was a very, very interesting part of Apollo history because it was the bit that actually landed on the moon. Now, that lunar lander can never have gotten to the moon if not for the Saturn V, which is sitting directly behind it. And this rocket is so absolutely large that I have to back up a good 10 feet before we can actually catch the whole thing in the frame. And even then, it is just absolutely giant. And some things you may notice, it has about a foot of a diameter. The diameter of the rocket is about a foot, and that is huge compared to this thing, which is about an inch. And the total height of this rocket, which about right now is 9 feet. So it is right up there on our ceiling, up there. See, it's about 3 inches from hitting our ceiling. So that's definitely something that's noteworthy about this rocket. This is the largest rocket in history. That's right, the largest in history to ever fly. Now, I know there's some other concept drawings of rockets that are larger than this, but this thing was the largest in history to ever be conceived and fly. This was the moon rocket. This is the Saturn V. Now, my model has a lot of the features that I like the real model to have. As you can see, I have extended the first stage recently, so the first stage does get cut right there. And that entire thing right there is the first stage. And then we have the second stage up here, which stops right about the top of that cone assembly. And then we have the third stage, which goes way up here. And that cone area right there is where the lunar module would have been held, that little spaceship we had down there. And at the very top, we have the command module with the launch escape system tower. This is basically the same thing that was on the Mercury rocket, but basically in a much larger scale, since that whole command module and service module and launch escape tower assembly is about the same size as this entire rocket here. You can see quite a scale difference. And I'm not sure if you can see it from way down here, but the hatch is open, the little hatch that you get into the rocket. So it looks like somebody left the door. The Saturn V is my favorite rocket from that era, mostly because it is just absolutely huge, and I really think it is a beautiful rocket. Now, compared to these little things that are standing out here at the feet of this rocket, it is just a monster. It is absolutely ginormous. Since I just started getting to spacecraft a few months ago, I have not yet had a huge amount of time to collect some aircraft and build them. But as of right now, I have some pretty decent rockets. We've got the big rocket back there, the Saturn V, the little Mercury rocket, and of course the Apollo lunar lander. Now, what do I have planned for the future? Where are my spacecraft going? Well, I'm going to sort of explain that to you right now. The next spacecraft that is on the table to get built is the space shuttle. Now, that was decided by you guys in the comment section of one of my videos where I asked you what I should build next, and the space shuttle got chosen to be the next thing that was getting built. So that will be getting built. It's going to stop about right there, halfway around here. So it's going to be about 3 or 4 feet tall. So it is not a small aircraft. It is quite large. It's not too big compared to the Saturn V, but it is still quite large. And where do I want to go after that? Well, I was thinking I could do maybe some SpaceX rockets, maybe the Falcon Heavy, though that one will be a little bit larger. It should be all the way up here at this cone right here, though that is still nothing compared to this one, which goes up another 3 feet past the Falcon Heavy. But I might also do a Falcon 9 or maybe some Soyuz. I already said I'm going to do a Soyuz, but that one should only go to about where the stripes are. I'm sort of using the Saturn V as a scale. Like, every rocket is smaller than this that has been flown, so I can sort of understand how big it is compared to the Saturn V. and I do have some plans for spacecraft in the future. Now, what I am thinking is actually to do a rocket garden, since this is the only spacecraft that will have a launch pad. None of the other ones are getting a launch pad. I'm sorry, I'm not rich. So once the Saturn V gets a launch pad, which I'm just going to point out now, this entire base you see here is going to be a launch pad. That's all going to be a launch pad. So this whole space is reserved for the Saturn V. So we can forget about putting an aircraft there. But over here on this table, this might be a rocket garden. The B-29 obviously is going to be moved, since this needs to go somewhere else to make room for the rocket garden. But I have planned on having some space shuttles, some smaller rockets, maybe a Saturn 1B, though I'm not sure I really want to do that since we already have the big Saturn V. So yeah, that's really what I'm planning on having to go here. I want to do a rocket garden, but we'll just have to see how that goes in the future. So that's all we'll really have for this video. I'm sort of going to wrap this up since I've gone on for a little while. Please be sure to hit that like button, hit subscribe so you never miss a rocket or a plane. I do both. And as always, bye for now.